Alright guys, Coach Jeff back again. Have a little bit different topic today. I was having a discussion again with one of my Spartans. We were sparring and we're talking about how do you bring intent? How do you make what you do in training translate to what you may run into the street? And bottom line, it pretty much comes down to intention. We're talking about specifically flow drills. And if some of you guys have seen those, the block check passes. Usually you get so caught up in the flow that you forget the whole point of that flow to begin with. You're forgetting the purpose behind what you are doing. When you are training, you have to understand what you are training for. So if you're training for self-protection, yet you never add a component of intent to your training's only going to be as good as long as your partner is somewhat compliant, controlled, there's no intent. And understand, you will never be able to recreate a street scenario in its entirety because there's things you cannot recreate. One, we're not trying to hurt anybody for real. Intent, malice, pure violence, you don't have that in training because your training would be one session and someone would be hurt and that's the end of your training. You're trying to protect your partner, but you also have to bring the best out in them. So when you guys are training, regardless of what your system is, you have to, every now and again, you have to add some of that intent, a little bit of that forward pressure. You got to kind of put them in an awkward position and you got to make them figure it out. This goes back to some of the earlier videos where we talked about principle versus technique and self-defense versus self-protection. All these are components that when you're actually training, you need to put some pressure. You need to get them a little adrenalized. How can you do that? You can get them tired first. You can smoke them before they ever start doing what they're doing. You can apply a little bit more violence, a little bit more intent, a little more power behind your techniques. But you have to understand, if you don't put that component into it, it will not be there when it's time for you to do it. Think of it like a volume dial on a radio. The best way I've heard it, a guy named Lee Morrison, if you don't know who he is, check out his stuff. The dude's an absolute beast. But he talks about this radio volume. So let's say you're training at about a 6. Conversation, let's say it's a 1, maybe a little heated, we'll run up to about a 3. Let's say a little bit of a confrontation, a little push and shove, and you get to about a 6. Maybe someone takes a swing at you, maybe that's like an 8. And you get the meth head cracked out with the screwdriver trying to stab you and take your money. Now you're talking a level 10. But let's say you only train at a 5, and that's all you got. You cannot turn it up when it counts. I can be train at a 10 and run into a 5 and I can turn it down, but you cannot turn it up. Hope that makes sense. So yeah guys, if your whole purpose of your training, if it's just for self-preservation of the art and you just love training, hey, do what you do. But if you're trying to use it for self-protection, these are some considerations. You must find a way to apply some realism and some intent, but also understand you will never recreate an actual scenario because malice and violence, that's something we would not do to a partner.